welcome to Thursday study session. If you're tuning in live, or to the people who are watching this as the replay, welcome. This is a space meant for Kemetic aspirants, for Kemetic initiates and things like that, to have a place to just consistently study together, just because anytime you meet a Kemetic person, their body of knowledge is, usually different. So, part of this is to, one, make myself study. Two, I find myself driving a lot. So, if I ever wanted to replay, or like I'm a big fan of audiobooks, but a lot of them aren't necessarily about Kemetic topics or issues and things like that. So hence, here we is. So this month's book is Ancient Egypt and Black Africa by Theophile Obenga. So in general, if you ever have any suggestions for books that you would like to be profiled on the Thursday study session, feel free to leave me a message, and we will try to work on it. Generally speaking, the books that are chosen, it can range, but we do try to stick to, generally kind of thin books so that we can get through them in a month. Actually, starting in January, we are going to be having a study group so that we can look at thicker books and just kind of take our time and pull them apart and stuff like that. So that being said, let's get started. Oh, and by the way, before we do that, I almost forgot to say, that thing that you're really always supposed to say. If you like what you see, please follow me. I have a YouTube channel by the same name, MenyetAnkhEnMaat, as well as my Instagram, MenyetAnkhEnMaat, and just in general, anything that has to do with Kemetic living in the 21st century. Please give me a follow, like, share, and all that good stuff. So let's jump in. So the book it starts out with pictures, so I love that. So let's go through the contents together really quick. So the first chapter is talking about African philosophy during the period of the Nasibidi, or the Pharaohs. Then African origin of philosophy, genetic linguistic connections to ancient Egypt and Black Africa, and then male-female relations in ancient Egypt. So that is one of the reasons why I did want to do this book, simply because I want to say about 2 months ago, on Paradigm Shift TV 314, we did have a whole conversation talking about Kemetic relationships, dating, marriage, and stuff like that. So this was one of the books I did go through originally to kind of prepare for that. So I figured, why not go through the whole book together? So the illustrations, we've got Akhenaten. We have, I believe that's Haru. I think that might just be regular Haru, because usually Haru got a crown of some sort. I'm like, that's pretty plain. But the book is dedicated to Mr. Obenga's wife. So he does continue on with more visuals. Side notes, I did not know that was Libyan desert glass. Actually, my father kind of found that out, and ever since I found that out, that's been my latest and greatest mineral that I'm super excited about just kind of working with. So I'm going to read this bottom part. It says, for ancient Kemetyw mathematics, Raket's number of mathematics deal with studying the entire nature, concrete reality, as well as the enigmas and mysteries of the universe. So it's just kind of going through numbers and things like that. So, forward. In the realm of knowledge, some notes on Kemet and Greece, and I'm like, oh boy, I'm already kind of taken in. Give me 2 seconds. I feel like the background music is a little overpowering, so I want to turn that down. So the whole thing, just right off the bat, the idea of, and granted, I'm like, let me go back and look. This was written in 1992. So in 2021, you know, it might just be some things that may not have aged as well. So I say that because it is kind of like a pet peeve of Menyets. Now, I want to speak for anybody else, but for me, it is a pet peeve that in the 21st century, as Kemetyw, we are constantly comparing ourselves, whether it's the ancient part of the legacy, specifically, it's always being compared to the Greeks. It's always being compared to, you know, the Romans. It just seems like it's always being compared. So that, or if we're talking about religiosity, that we're always comparing it with Christianity or Islam and stuff like that. So I just hate the fact that that's the forward. MenyetAnkhEnMaat team. Thank you, Dua. Or Nehem. So I'm on the forward, so you didn't miss anything. The publication of this introductory volume of 4 lectures by Professor Theophile Obenga marks a turning point in the methods and approaches in the study of comparative world history. All right, I guess. This line was utilized by Sheikh Anta Diop in his multidisciplinary approach to the study of African history, and here advanced by his disciple Theophile Obenga. What distinguishes Obenga's work from others is that he goes back to the original Greek in portraying the Greek world through the mouthpiece and language of their own greatest thinkers. The fact that this approach, in relation to precedents of Kemet over that of the Greek world, has been consistently characterized as an expression of Greek misunderstanding, simultaneously expresses the contradiction and the problematic. Okay, this way that reads is interesting. And the problematic of the specter of Western civilization, basing its traditional university education on that disseminated by Greek model. That was an odd sentence, but okay. Such a problematic never produces the obvious engagement of disentanglement. It merely increases the obligation of Occident to degrade and underplay the significance of the development of scientific thought in Kemet, for which extant records of Greeks themselves confirm, which was only meaningfully propagated in Greece from the 6th century. The publication of these essays, which were specifically prepared by the author for the 5th annual conference of the African Origin of Civilization, held at the School of Oriental and African Studies, London University, at the beginning of the first week of October 1990, demonstrated that mainstream academia had no stomach for debate, and more importantly, felt that they could not debate with a highly qualified multidisciplinarian such as Theophile Obenga. It must be stated that weekly seminars are held at the Center for African Studies in departments such as anthropology and area studies, for which a visible number of the center's academics regularly attend. I'm like saying MenyetAnkhEnMaat to everybody now. I'm trying to wave and it's not letting me. But, all right, so I'm technically waving at everybody. Dua for coming. So the lectures were given a half-page exposure to the center's termly bulletin, yet only 2 lecturers turned up. This demonstrated, if any further proof were needed, that any direction which veered away from traditional monopoly of falsely proclaimed truth would be ignored. It could not and would not debate simply because such engagement led to validation of the tendency of difference and consequently could lead to valuing and interrogating such a position. So pretty much, we don't want to talk to you because you're not going to continue our own narrative. That's what I'm getting out of this so far. So, and again, since this book was written in like 1992, I just always assume that this is something that is already known. Like, I want to say maybe in the past couple of months, I kind of just realized that people still debate this, and I think it's kind of weird because it's like, but it's been around since 1992. Like, not that everybody would have to accept any particular like theory, but it's just so interesting that it's just still such a big thing to like in general. So is there a Greek philosophy? I feel like this might be controversial. This might be where people are like, no, we don't want to listen to that. Obenga engages this question with a natural rationality. Oh man, I said that wrong. With a rationality which in the main has been too obvious for many scholars to have approached. In the essay, The African Origin of Philosophy, he anchors his questioning at the beginning by searching for etymology of the word philosophy, and shows that its association with the word wisdom does not stand up to scrutiny. He shows conclusively that Greek vocabulary could not have developed this word. In support of Obenga's thesis, John Lyons, professor of linguistics and dean of School of Social Studies at Sussex University, says, let us suppose, for example, that we are translating from classical Greek into English, and that we are confronted with the word Sophia. This is conventionally translated as wisdom, and in many contexts it is, and more often might appear a perfectly satisfactory equivalent. For example, let us consider a sentence containing the adjective sophos, related sonatically and semantically as Sophia was wise is to wisdom, which occurs in the Greek text in an author like Plato, and is rendered into English as Homer is wiser than Hesiod. Out of context, someone without a good knowledge of Greek or sufficient knowledge of the social and cultural background might well interpret this statement as if wise were being used in the same meaning as in, it is to say, Shakespeare was wiser than Marlowe. But Sophia and wisdom do not have the same range of meaning. As in, in many contexts, the best English translation of the Greek sentence would be Homer is a better poet than Hesiod. Indeed, it is arguable that this comes closest to what the Greek means when sophos is being used in its prototypical sense. If a shoemaker or carpenter is good at his job, he is just readily called sophos, as a good doctor, poet, or statesman is. I'm like, now I gotta do all my waving, more waving. It was necessary to produce this lengthy quote in order to see the development of contextual analysis advanced by the author, which uncategorically places serious doubt on the mainstream interpretation of sophos, a component of philosophia. One could speculate that this knowingly carte blanche interpretation was probably motivated by political considerations, i.e. that it was to the advanced Western civilization by placing wisdom in Greek antiquity, which makes sense. By posing such a seemingly rhetorical question, one has opened up the debate on a fundamental notion of the meaning. If Greek philosophy existed, where is the Greek word which names such an intellectual activity? But the argument does not only hinge upon the etymology of the word philosophy, but on a number of connected claims and structures which need to be vigorously interrogated, which I actually am starting to find this kind of interesting. But it's kind of like being a nerd for the little gritty details, but it is interesting. So, could Greek social life produce philosophy? In the beginning of Greek cultural awakening, the society was already deeply rooted in a slave economy, i.e., the material gains from which the society was motored were derived from slave owning. Therefore, at the time in the 7th century, when Thales was reputed to have introduced philosophy into Greece, the society had a constitution which condoned slavery, usury, and highly oppressive class system, which would become the norm in Europe. Aristotle made plain this fact. Sorry, I was going to say that out of order. For the Athenian constitution was oligarchical in all other respects, and in particular the poor were enslaved to the rich, themselves and their children and their wives. All the land was in the hands of a few, and if the poor failed to pay their rents, both they and their children were liable to seizure. All loans were made on the security of the person. Until the time of Solon, he was the first champion of the people. The harshest and bitterest aspect of the Constitution for the masses was the fact of their enslavement, though they were discontented on the grounds too. It could be said that there were nothing in which they had to share. Not only were the masses of people slaves, but the system of appointments in government reflected not a democracy but despotism. This can be seen most vividly in the classification arranged by Solon, described by Aristotle as a champion of the people. On attaining power, Solon classified the citizens into 4 distinct classes based on their criteria of wealth. The 500 bushel class, if one can obtain from one's estate 500 measures of dry and liquid goods. The cavalry, if the measures were 300, the rankers would be measured by 200, and the laborers pretty much was everybody else. Everybody else. So 199 and below, yeah, no, you had it rough, apparently. All right. This was the basis of Western democracy right up into the beginnings of the 20th century, when voting rights were based upon the position of wealth and land ownership. And in the 19th century, membership of the House of Parliament in England could be brought. This also highlights to be problematic of Solon being accepted as a liberator, yet confined in his political pragmatism to limiting the rights of the laboring class to that of non-voters. One is not disputing that both slaves and laborers in Athens, Solon was a hero, but merely magnifying the fact of the limitation of participation in democratic Athenian life. This goes some way of explaining the social inequalities constituted in Greek society, and which clearly demonstrate the absence of any philosophical school which disputed that state. Even the convinced moralist Socrates did not experience a conflict of conscience by exonerating the murder of a laborer by a land proprietor. In Euthyphro, the character of the same name informs Socrates that he will be prosecuting his own father for manslaughter, and Socrates responds in shock. Good heavens, of course, most people have no idea, Euthyphro, what the rights of such a case are. I imagine that that it isn't everyone that would make such course, but only one who is far advanced in wisdom. Euthyphro says, "Far indeed, Socrates." Socrates responds, "Well, is the person that your father has killed a member of your own household?" Obviously he is. You wouldn't, of course, be prosecuting him for killing an outsider. Socrates constructs a debate, an argument, a rationale for the justification of the laborer's murder and the exoneration of Euthyphro's father. This goes on for several pages until finally Socrates produces his masterpiece of moral reasoning. Socrates: if you didn't show all about piety and impiety, you would never have attempted to prosecute your aged father for manslaughter on behalf of a mere laborer. You would have been much too afraid of the gods, and much too ashamed of what men might think, to run such a risk in case you should be wrong in doing so. Interestingly, Although Socrates' dialogue, laced in from double entendre and innuendo, attempt to dissuade Euthyphro from prosecuting his father, Euthyphro leaves precisely at the time of Socrates' intransigence. Comparatively, this lack of responding to confrontation is dictum of Kemet, enshrined in the instructions of the king Amenemhat, which implies or suggests that Euthyphro may well have belonged to a secret order like that of Pythagorean school, which principally based its teaching upon that which was acquired in Kemet. The question can now be posed whether one can seriously attribute the title of philosopher to Socrates, who demonstrates no reservation in weighing the murder of a laborer, the lowest class, against the probable hostile response from the public. Here Socrates does not exhibit any of the qualities of philosopher in moral terms which we can understand. Murder is murder, whether committed by a slave or a king. But for Socrates and for Greece, there was a clear distinction in the act of murder based upon class. Socrates freely admits this when he refers to what men might think. In other words, Socrates was admitting to the fact that though the advanced thinker may privately acknowledge certain philosophical and moral principles, to admit these publicly would be suicide. This can be traced and compared to the Greek canon in morality, which Tobin shows does not allow for moral distinction in wrong or right, but only in the defense of status. That vaguely sounds like the United States right now. Like, that doesn't sound that far off. Like, oh, okay. Ike functions solely to maintain an established status quo, which no consideration as to whether it be right or wrong in a moral sense. It can be deduced, therefore, that although Socrates was launching himself into an unacceptable moral and philosophical domain, yeah, it really is the U.S. I'm like, how much money you got? Okay, well, if you got this much money, this is what's acceptable, and you got it, you good. Like, just go ahead. Like, okay. I'll just start that sentence again. It can be deduced, therefore, that although Socrates was launching himself into an unacceptable moral and philosophical domain, foreign to the Greek established canon and the Athenian state, he was both contradictory and affirmatory. That is to say, he was still physically confined to Greece and its environment of influence, yet connected to the philosophical system of Kemet, which animated his sense of morality, to introduce a new canon to the Greek world. That he died for such a defense is admirable. Is it, though? Is it? We'll see. But the contradictions in his life were apparent, testify to a veritable conflict of moral and social interests. The Cretan, this Greek, Epimenides, who counseled Solon prior to the latter taking office, schooled the Athenians in abolishing the cruel and barbarous customs of their women, and that they should be more observant of justice and more inclined to union. Elsewhere, the observance of justice and more inclined, elsewhere in detailing the story of Atlantis, Plato's narrator refers to the various barbarian and Greek nations of the day. It should be noted that Greece was not a unified nation at that stage, but consisted of ethnic groups and separate towns within a single landmass. Solon, who abandoned Athens for Kemet after the hostility expressed to his reforming policies and subsequently spent 10 years there, was firstly influenced by Kemetic laws in instituting new policies in Greece. And Plato in Timaeus positively points out to Solon's education in Kemet prior to his short reign in office. Cretus says, if he had finished the story he brought back from Kemet and hadn't been compelled to neglect it because of the class struggles and other evils he found here on his return. So that one sees that even in the basic introduction of humanizing laws, for the first time in Greece, Kemet played the fertilizing role model. That Solon had to flee Athens and in his return to Kemet testifies to the social circumstance which prevailed in Greece at this time, which made social egalitarianism a veritable impossibility. That is like, I'm like, dang, this is a long introduction. I'm like, but can we get to the first page? I mean, chapter? Oh, it's not that bad. It's only like 4 more pages. But I think that's really interesting, especially because like I've lately really just been thinking about pre-dynastic and proto-dynastic history of Kemet. And it's very interesting just kind of reading about how everything kind of developed and changed, and like where certain things came from, where certain symbols came from, where certain like just customs, practices, and so on and so forth. So overall, like in my mind, I always think of Greeks coming into Kemet. And, you know, I know the usual narration is like, oh, they came, they took our stuff and blah, 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 which, yeah, okay. But this idea that, how can I put it? Societal egalitarian was a veritable impossibility. Because once like the Hyksos and everything like that ended up coming into Kemet, you can see like how they tried to make Kemet Greek and not, you know, like they kind of still paid homage and, you know, did it on paper, but they didn't actually like stick to it. They like couldn't help themselves. They were just like super Greeked out. So it's like the fact that the fall, like if you just kind of look at the intermediary periods with all the other groups and this, that, and third, but then, you know, what was supposed to save Greece ended up making Kemet, well, one of the biggest contributing factors for Kemet falling. So I don't know. I just put that. My brain was just like, interesting, but okay. So what was the meaning of a sage in Greece? Honestly, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of want to just like. I kind of want to just skip it. If worse comes to worse, I'll come back to it. Like, I'm going to just skip it. Because respectfully, disrespectfully, apathetically, the book is called Ancient Egypt and Black Africa, yet the whole introduction is about Greece. But that, I'm just saying. So we're going to skip to chapter 1. So, African philosophy during the period of the Pharaohs. So, number 1, the question of, quote, African philosophy. These are just comments and introductory remarks in order to avoid all sorts of confusions and to determine our subject more accurately. By philosophy, both loosely and exactly, we mean speculations which concern human destiny and condition. Such speculations or reflections focus on problems such as the creation or advent of the world, on problems such as freedom and immortality of the soul, the existence of nature. I'm like remixing a little bit here. Of nature, like, okay, I know it says God, but we're going to say nature. On the knowledge of thoughts, feelings, and actions of man, on sciences, their objects, and their method, on what is beautiful or aesthetics, what is good, ethics, virtues, and true. Such speculations or reflections are obviously to be distinguished from common popular opinions, aka Greek stuff. They must be lucid in themselves, that is, at the very least, self-explanatory. Excuse me. So, I think in the 21st century, to, you know, as we like try to move this legacy forward, I think that this, at least that one paragraph, would be an excellent place for us to start as far as, you know, problems, like the fact that he says problems such as freedom. So it's kind of this idea of, why is freedom a problem? Why is it that way? What are the problems that come along from us being free, from us having every and any choice available to our disposal? So sometimes that can lead us to confusion, to being overwhelmed, to being, just kind of stuck, to making poor choices, to, you know what I mean? Like, so I think that was just interesting that he put it like that. But just again, like, these are, I don't want to say these aren't conversations people are not having. I'm sure people are having these kinds of conversations. It's just, it seems like sometimes they get lost in the sauce. But this is what being a Kemetic person is all about. Like, the philosophies that we follow, the traditions that we follow, our ethics, our morals, our values, like, that's the foundation, but yet somehow we kind of don't really talk about it. It's a little interesting. Like, we talk about all the other stuff, like the fluff, like, but not the, I'm going to say it, meat and potatoes, because not everybody's vegan. Meat and potatoes. Moving on. Before the present day comprehension of the word philosophy in the beginning, this term was encompassed by all of human knowledge, some elements of which, little by little, were formed into independent disciplines: mathematics, astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, history, geography, etc. Philosophy was therefore the study of nature in the broadest sense of the word: natural nature, social nature, human nature. Aristotle, for example, studied all of these sciences. We back to the Greeks again, like, sir. I'm going to just blame that on 1992, but whatever. Aristotle, for example, studied all these sciences, all of this knowledge. The supreme aim of such speculations and such knowledge was for humankind to acquire wisdom. Sophia. We back to Greek again. Wisdom is born in science of knowledge and etymology. In the Greek language, the word philosophy indeed means love of wisdom. Philosophical speculations can present themselves either in oral form, that is to say, the oral statement, or in the written form, that is to say, the written statement. What is important and essential is that such speculation should be expressed explicitly. So back to what I was saying. In the Kemetic legacy, we're not very explicit. And I feel like when we use that word in 2021, it's always like, ooh, that, like, you talk about naughty stuff. No, clearly not. But it is true. And not even that. There are certain topics that are talked about explicitly that don't need to be. Or they're talked about explicitly, but they are, like, the people who are arguing them are not accurate. They're not really learned. They learn stuff from social media, and that's it. So again, one of the reasons why we have study session, because it's like, no, we need to read books. It's good to, do the YouTube and the social media thing, but, like, no, we need to read books. Like, that's important. So that group of people, like the people who claim Kemet, but they're, like, super hard-headed and they're very misogynistic and they're, like, super about 2A rights, which, don't get me wrong, we love 2A rights over here. I'm just saying. I'm painting a picture. Follow me now. Where they're just so bent on American values, and by American values, traditional American values, if you catch my drift. And it's just very interesting because we're Kemites, so the fact that you're kind of putting that above what the ancestors were telling us we need to do is just kind of weird. So we're going to now call those people the Aunu. They're the fakers. They're the charlatans. They're not real Kemites. They just like to wear ankhs and think that they're doing something. They're like fake woke people. So yeah, that. So again, these explicit conversations are going on, but they're not about mathematics and astronomy and physics and chemistry and social nature and natural nature and human nature. It's not about any of that stuff that the ancestors was doing. They busy talking about Joe Biden and vaccines, which is like, bruh, like there is so much more out there. There's so much more we need to be talking about, but let's get caught up in the distractions and explicitly talk about the distractions that have very little to do with Kemet. Like, all right, okay, beloved. Like, it just don't make no sense. So then it goes back to, is that really the love of wisdom? Are we even being wise? Like, if we're just kind of running the grist through the mill, like, then again, that's why I want to say, like, why don't we just call them what they are? They're Aunu. They're not actually Kemetic people. Like, they're not aspiring. They just want to argue on the interwebs, and that's it. So back to the reading. One can therefore acknowledge a priori that there are in Black Africa speculations and philosophies in oral and written forms, but such speculations and philosophies can only be proved a posteriori, that is to say, discovered, extracted from their form of transmission, and studied after research work by Marcel. I can't say, I'm not going to say I can't do anything. I can do anything. Marcel Granul. I said that super American sounding. There was no accent one there. Unu. It's like if you did it, technically it's AW, NW, if I'm not mistaken. But I put AHOO dash NW. So it's like the emphasize the oo, because the transliteration. Stand by. I have visuals that I've been creating to put this out there. So, but yes, Aunu. If you look in, it's from the Vigus dictionary as well as the Faulkner dictionary, and it basically means like to be a fraud. Like, so, to be a charlatan, to be a fraud, to just be somebody out here trying to steal some shine, fakely. Now I'm just making up words. All right, back to it. So he's listing the book that it came from. This research work, at the same time of a historic, linguistic, and philosophical nature, history allows one to determine the period and chronological frame of African speculations and philosophies. Linguistics is a way of taking languages and other semiotic means into account to relate these philosophies in a given society, and philosophical method allows one to question and exploit to the fullest these speculations and philosophies in order to extract their contents, their fundamental concepts, their human message, their ultimate significance. Again, if we are Kemites, are we exercising history, linguistics, and philosophical method? Are we pulling it apart? Are we understanding the human meaning? Or are we arguing about Americanness and pain and trauma and, whatever the talking points are in the media, So it's right there. One can see that to talk about African philosophy, one must get away from the well-trodden paths of Africanist study, which often ignore the temporal dimension of the society studied and the linguistic and semiological positions of these societies. On the other hand, the very richness of European philosophy in Greece and Rome in antiquity, then over the course of the centuries in France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, made us unaware, more or less up to recently, of African philosophies or those of India, China, etc. So basically, Europe did Europe's thing, and he's saying we need to undo that, decolonize. So I like to say, at least nowadays, I feel like that's what people are really trying to do. So maybe a little late, but at least we here. In Africa, because of cultural prejudices, Africanists, that is to say, Europeans who study African civilizations, obviously from the outside admit on the whole of existence of systems of thought, cosmogonies, visions of the world, etc., but never philosophy. So they doing word games. I see what he's saying. The most daring of these Africanists mention ethnophilosophy, going a step further than Lucien Levi Broll from 1857 to 1939, and his pre-logoism. Others suggest the term pre-philosophy, gratuitously suggesting that true philosophy starts within Greece. We know that's not true. Well, today, thanks to the work of African scholars, especially in Cameroon, Benin, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Zaire, and Kenya, it is now established that there are African philosophies which can be studied and taught and even compared to philosophical speculations developed elsewhere in the world, in Europe, Asia, and in America. But this very important work of African graduate philosophers only concerns the modern and contemporary period. For example, from Alton Wilhelm Amo of the 18th century to today with Kwame Nkrumah, author of Concentrism. I didn't even know that. About to go look that up later. I didn't even know that. So, look for that book. Therefore, one must try to fill the temporal gaps by undertaking thorough research in order to reestablish the whole history of African philosophy from antiquity to present. This is why we are interested in African philosophy of the Pharaonic period, to connect the contemporary with that of the ancient, and to demonstrate the pre-existence of African philosophy before its appearance anywhere else on this earth. Number 2. African philosophy during the periods of the Pharaohs, questions of method and documentation. An initiation into general philosophy is necessarily prescribed, for such an institution allows us to understand how the task of studying philosophy is undertaken, and what the very object of philosophical thought is. In my own case, initiation into the history of Western philosophy, from the Greek thinkers to the contemporary philosophers, took place at the University of Bordeaux in France. The particular history of ancient Kemet must also be known in its essential characteristics and moments, as much as the Kemetic Pharaonic language. It is, in fact, useful to try to understand the ancient world of Kemet from the inside, instead of being satisfied merely with works, however erudite, which would not always exploit all the available information, which is like, OMG, so true. Because, and this, again, something else that just grinds Menyet's gears, is that, and I feel like I've kind of emphasized this a little already, but this idea that we emphasize our Americanness so much. And, or like, because outside of the United States, I know down in Brazil, like, being Kemetic is like really kind of picking up. I know in South Africa it's really starting to pick up. I know in the UK it's starting to pick up. But the idea is, even though modern practitioners, we're like starting to come together and hopefully now get it together, we're all still outside of the indigenous culture, so it really, really behooves us to actually try to understand the culture, as opposed to just what we're taught in middle school history class, which is like super, super watered down, or what we would like it to be, which I find a lot of people do that. Because not everything about Kemet is nice and squeaky clean and beautiful and wonderful. Like we were reading where it was saying earlier about what was it? Greece was all about slavery and this, that, and the third. Like, why are you acting like slavery wasn't in Kemet? Like, cut it out. Like, it was there, and it had very, very structured social status and categories and stuff like that. It wasn't, again, it wasn't the Greek expression of it. It looked different, but the fact that the introduction was even framed without kind of necessarily saying what the culture of Kemet was, like, I find that to be a common theme where people will write about Kemet but not give context. So it gives people, like, I don't want to say the wrong impression, but it allows for misunderstanding. Again, going back, are we explicitly talking about, what we need to be talking about? Or are we just like, oh, this feels good, warm fuzzies, like, no, that's not a good thing to do. Like, we have to be thorough. Therefore, one must try to fill temporal gaps by undertaking thorough research in order to reestablish the whole history of African philosophy from antiquity to present. Blah, 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 blah. I read that already. My bad. Sorry. So he said he was already in there. All right. For a long time, Egyptologists have been trying to understand Egyptian thought. Let us point out some of the most meaningful efforts. James H. Breasted, The Development of Religion and Thought in Ancient Egypt. John A. Wilson, Egypt, The Nature of the Universe, Chapter 2. The Function of the State, Chapter 3. The Value of Life, Chapter 4, which I'm not going to lie, I'm about to highlight that. That last one, The Values of Life. That sounds like something we should be explicitly studying and pulling apart. So I'm going to see if I could get my hands on that, and maybe we could go through that in a study session in general. The last three fine studies by Wilson can be found in the collective work, The Intellectual Adventure of Ancient Man, an essay on speculative thought in the ancient Near East, Chicago, 1946 to 1977. I imagine that means it was reprinted in 1977. So now he goes on to just kind of list a whole bunch of references. So I'm going to make it a point. It starts on page 29 to page 31. So if you got the book, those are the pages. If you want to comb through just any resources, I'm definitely going to go through some of the resources. Some of it is in French, and some of it is in German. So Menyet can't read. I mean, don't get me wrong, I got Google Translate. So if I got to try to make it happen, I will do the best I can. Because 8 years of French, 6 years of Spanish, and I still can't speak better than a second grader. So, but we're going to try. We're going to try. So, Old Kingdom, 2815 to 2400 BCE. He clearly did not put that in there, but I'm putting that in there, BCE, because we're going to correct that. That's a 1992 error. So the pyramid text, a corpus of 2,217 formula or paragraphs in modern editions. These formula are inscribed on the inside of walls of the chamber of the Nesut Merkut, the king's pyramid. Sometimes the queens from the 5th dynasty, Unis, around 2600 BCE. It is an important legacy of ancient Kemet, and one can find fragments of text on funerary monuments of the Sate, I don't know if you pronounce the E, period around 600 BCE. Teachings or wisdoms or instructions. These are Sapential works, which convey a humanism, suggesting to man the route to decent conduct and success. Teachings of Imhotep, advisor to King Djoser, Third Dynasty, around 2800 BCE, doctor and architect of the Step Pyramid of Saqqara. I'm like, I think I got it's back there. It's one of those. I'm looking. I'm like, I gotta show you. Like, I'm being like a little kid in kindergarten. Like, look what I have. Like, okay, chill. The teachings of Kegemni, visor to Seneferu, Fourth Dynasty. The teachings of Ptahhotep, visor under the reign of Azizi, Fifth Dynasty, 2600 BCE. The teachings of Caris are less known, which means Menyet want to go find it. Blah, blah, blah. Only the teachings of Ptahhotep reach us in its totality, thanks to more recent copies. These teachings are a remarkable type of research into moral perfection, because nobody is born wise, and also a search for refined language. The text called Memphite Theology, transmitted by the Stela of Shabaka, is an essay on philosophical and theological reflection of Ptah's priests in his Memphis sanctuary. This essay on cosmology and theology ascribed to the word, language, and the thought or heart of Ptah, the creation of all that exists, nature, man, quadrupeds, and reptiles. Ooh, I'm like, we getting into the time. So I'm like, let me see if I could at least get through the first intermediate period, and then we will have to leave off there because Instagram only gives you an hour again now. So the first intermediate period, intermediate. I don't know why I always want to say intermediary. I feel like I've heard people say that too. That is the 9th to 11th dynasties, 2300 BCE to 2050 BCE. So, admissions of the Kemetic sage, Ipuwer's prophecies. This work reveals a huge effort of literary research, birth of poetic art in Egypt, and speaking of the sad effects of political and social changes which occurred in the country. I feel like if you read the Hosea, which I think is over, I'm pointing at books and I get paused. So, if I'm not mistaken, some of that might be in that book up there. Dialogue of a Desperate Person and His Ba. I feel like that's also in one of a different book, because it's like a conversation with the soul or something, I believe, in other translations. So a desperate man discusses with his soul within himself on the opportunity of staying in the world of the living, from where and now banished the values which made it attractive. The teachings of King Makari, attributed to King Kemetyw II of the 10th dynasty. It is in the treatise of good political and moral conduct, with reflections on personal attitudes to justice, meditative silence, respect for laws, fear of nature, perpetuation of happy destiny and the beyond, and on equilibrium that can bring to society. So I think that those also, like, honestly, pretty much anything in this these chapters, like these books, are definitely going to be books that I'm like, okay, we got to add that, or maybe they're like as part of some of the other volumes that are back there, because it just seems like, you know, when people always say as Kemetic people, like, oh, what should I read, it's like a book. And again, what it said earlier, like, we want to explicitly pull apart and really dive in to you know, what our philosophy is as Kemetic people. These are where we should start. Like, where better to start where you're talking about justice, moral conduct, meditative silence, respect for laws, fear of nature, perpetuation of happy destiny in the beyond, and on equilibrium in society. Like, shouldn't that be what we're talking about instead of the Christians got it from us? Ugh. Or like the same old retired or should be retired arguments. Like, we keep having the same conversations, but never stuff grounded necessarily in what our ancestors were writing and reading and studying so that they could rule great civilizations. Like, it just seems a little backwards. I'm just saying. And no, no shade on people's hustle. I get people make money off of it, but we can only be as good as the people we're listening to. And if we don't know that there's other stuff out there, or there's no one out there that's like talking about these things, then the Kemetic legacy really might be in trouble. So this specific book is Ancient Egypt and Black Africa by Theophile Obenga. So every Thursday we're going to be reading this book, or parts, until we finish it. And welcome. Thank you for coming. I hope you come again. I feel like I just said like a whole 7-Eleven spiel. But and I do have some of the old books that we've gone through over on my YouTube channel. So if you ever wanted to, just kind of catch up. But in this book, we're still on chapter 1, but starting on page 31, actually not even, starting on page 29, the author gives a lot of really good resources. So when you came in, those were the books that I was kind of talking about. So just to finish the first intermediary period, songs of the harpist, poems sung by singers in funerary scenes. Side notes, as Kemetic people, there are just some things that we're supposed to do. And I mean, if there's anything that Kemet is known about, it's about funerary rites. Like, what do we do when we pass away? What happens to us? What happens to our body? What do we do with the body? How do we mourn? What is mourning? Like, again, these are conversations we don't really talk about because we're so stuck on America and America's bad. And like, yeah, I get that, but our ancestors have the solutions, but we're not talking about that. Like, please, 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 please. So like funerary scenes, songs, like, people always talk about, oh, hip hop has gotten this way, that way, or whatever. Like, so why don't we look at the songs that our ancestors used to sing? Why don't we try to maybe make some dope beats? Like, I'll be honest, drill music, the beats, they get me going. I'm sorry. Like, I know that sounds, people be like, oh my God, you're so ignorant. How could you listen to that? Because the beat sounds good. Like, music is supposed to move you. If it's not moving you, it's not working. So, like, why is it that we cannot modernize, the beat, the music, or what have you, but take what our ancestors already gave us? Like, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel when it literally is there all over the place? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Tale of Ossian, the loquacious peasant. I love that word. I love the word loquacious. I always have, like, ever since I learned it, I was like, oh my God. Anyway, so one of the longest literary texts in ancient Kemet, in which the peasant of Oasis, Wadi el Netram, west of the Delta, ill-treated by the men of an unscrupulous local official, complains to superior authorities, not authors, hello, up to the king himself, and this reminds me, this sounds like, again, part of the Hosea, and it literally, it has a bunch of things, and it says the usual themes of wisdom, conception of authorities' duties, rights of the poor, importance of justice in the eyes of nature and of men. So again, we're sitting here talking about, like, this system doesn't serve us, this system doesn't do this system doesn't that. But it's like, but the tale of Ossian talks about this already. So like, we don't have to sit and try to figure it out. We literally just need to read what the ancestors said already, and then bring it up to date. That's it. That's really it. And again, if we agree that we are Kemetic people, it takes out that whole, well, no, I'm right, no, you're right, no, like that arguing, because it's the ancestors. If we all agree this is what we're doing, then we're not going to argue against the ancestors per se. I mean, I feel like the only way we're going to argue is if we're talking about like, okay, well, what time periods? Because depending on what time period, some people might be like, oh no, those were invaders, we don't want to listen to them, blah, blah, blah. So I get that might be the debate, but generally speaking, we don't have to start all over again. It's already there. That's why, like, when some people be like, oh, Kemet doesn't do anything, Kemet's just like, oh, it's just a bunch of they don't call it malarkey, but you know, the same old same that you get from, you know, outsiders who don't practice or observe what you do. Like, they always have the same kind of criticisms, like, oh, it's not even like real, you can't even apply it to everyday life. I'm like, well, that's only up to the first intermediary period, and we already got a whole lot. We got our funerals, we got some songs, we got morals, we got values, we got how do you keep, I was gonna say ma'at, but how do you keep ma'at every day? How can, you know, like, we got a whole lot already. We didn't even get to the middle kingdom, the second intermediary. We didn't even get to all of that stuff yet. We got it. We got it already. So to all, you know, like all these people, like, I don't know, we don't need to be confused. We just don't need to be confused. There's nothing to be confused about. So that's where we're going to stop for today. Page 33. Again, the book is there. Ancient Egypt and Black Africa by Theophile Obenga. So we're going to, by next week, finish this chapter at least, because it is a longer one. It's not too long. We can finish it for next week. So if anything, please come back next Thursday. Join us. You know, it doesn't have to be just me talking and reading. We could definitely have conversations. We have been known in the past to kind of read a little something and get off on a tangent. Like, it's a great time. It's a great mental exercise. And it just brings us together as Kemetic folks, as people who are aspiring, as initiates. It just brings us together. So please come back next week, next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, you can follow, like, share over with YouTube, on Instagram. We got Kemetic Living in the 21st Century over on Facebook. That is our private group. And just in general, I have my website, I said my own name wrong. Hello. MenyetAnkhEnMaat.com. And pretty much that's where I do my blogging from. And I just kind of have my own aquaja, my own online store to kind of just sell different goods for Kemetic practitioners and initiates and aspirants. So until next week, I hope that everyone stays safe, and MenyetAnkhEnMaat.
We the reflection of our ancestors. We like to thank you for the building blocks you left us. As your spirit possessed us, show you